Well, Ian, it's probably quite appropriate to find you sitting on a bench surrounded by your beloved native trees here, and just happen to have your new book with you. Would you perhaps like to tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how you came to write this book?
Well, it is indeed very nice sitting here and watching the people moving slowly past. Well, I'm at Lincoln University, and I'm a professor of nature conservation, and I'm also director of what we call the Isaac Centre for Nature Conservation, and Lady Isaac has graciously allowed her name to be used for that Isaac Centre.
Right. So, how long have you been there?
Well, I've been overseas for a long time, and I came back to. I've been in the UK for most of my life, right. And came back to New Zealand in the 1990s. From there on, I've been on a mission.
Right.
And that mission is to promote these things, to promote native plants, because when I was living in the UK, I looked back very fondly on New Zealand and the wonderful national parks and the mountains and the landscapes and keeping in touch with many people. But when I came back here to join Lincoln University and moving around Canterbury countryside, I was just so saddened by the lack of New Zealand native plants, because it looked clean and green, but there wasn't a native plant to be seen. Quite. And often I would pick up guests from the airport and take them out to Lincoln. And these might be guests from the UK or throughout Europe. And as we were driving down towards Lincoln, they would be saying, well, where are the native hedgerows, the native plant hedgerows? And they weren't there. So I was deeply depressed, but also depressed, annoyed in a way, because I'd often go around talking to schools, and some school children had this thought that macrocarpus were native plants.
Right.
And then, of course, reading the newspapers, there's this ongoing controversy between exotic versus native versus exotic, which I don't think there's much in it. So
quite a strange thing.
Well, it is, and I don't think it's very helpful. So I set about on a mission, and that was simply to promote the greater awareness and the greater use of New Zealand native plants for all reasons. And thinking back to that time, when in the sort of late 1990s, mind you, it's all changed since then, but around in the 1990s, you go into a garden nursery and ask for advice about native plants, and you wouldn't get that. And if you wanted to purchase some native plants, they would say, well, go round the back there and way in the back. But that's starting to change. So with all that, I'm being so saddened by the perception and the profile of New Zealand native plants, I set about on a mission and said, well, one of the things I could do is perhaps publish books for the wider community about New Zealand native plants, and that's what I set about doing, starting from about the late 1990s.
Right. And I believe this book that we're going to talk about this afternoon, Living with Natives, isn't your first one either.
That's the second one, right. and there's going to be a trilogy. Don't tell anyone, but everyone these days writes trilogies, don't they?
Yeah. And then they make films out of them.
I'm not sure about that. Well, the first one was with my dear friend David Given, who's since passed on, I'm afraid. And I well remember, this was about 1999, and I well remember sitting with him together, drinking tea together, and thinking, well, we need somehow to promote New Zealand native plants. How can we do that? And we knew for a fact that many people want to know, well, what can I put in pots? What can I use as hedgerows? And how do I plant them? How do I propagate them? And that's how we started. So the first book was a very much practical and hands-on book called Going Native.
Right.
Making use of New Zealand native plants, published by Canterbury University Press, by myself and dear old David. And as I say, it's a very much hands-on book. And that book, to our delight, sold out very, very quickly. So it's now out of print, and I believe many people are still looking for that.
It hasn't been reprinted, unfortunately.
Canterbury University haven't yet reprinted it, although they might be considering that. But it's very much a hands-on with lots of ideas. Everything from potting to hedgerows, to school playgrounds, propagation using seed or vegetative material and all of that. So we're delighted with that. And then a few years later, I was going around New Zealand visiting people, talking about their native plant projects. And at the back of my mind was the fact that many people had said to me, well, New Zealand native, I mean, they're not very colourful, are they?
And, you hear that all the time, don't you?
You hear that all the time, and they're just hard to grow. And here I was visiting these people with their native plant projects, and they were telling me, oh, easy to grow, easy to propagate, colourful, lots of colour, not only shades of green as we have here, but lots of colourful flowers and so on. And I thought to myself, well, there's inspiration here. Wonderful, wonderful people. They have stories to tell. So I thought what would be a useful idea would be somehow to gather together personal stories, a compilation of personal stories about people and what they're doing with native plants. So that's how we came up with this one. And that's really what it is. It's living with natives. New Zealanders talk about their love of native plants. And there's 44 contributors in this, and they're all very, very personal stories about their love of native plants. Politicians, artists, academics, schools, a whole range of people. And I have to say that reading some of those stories will bring joy to your heart, but also tears to your eyes, because some of those accounts did, in fact, when the people were telling me about their projects, for some of them, it did bring tears to their eyes, because they were just so passionate about their role with native plants. So that was published late last year, again by Canterbury University Press. Myself and my co-editor Michelle Frey, and we have a marvellous photographer, and that is John Maillard. John Maillard has taken these wonderful photographs of people, because this book is very much about the people and their roles with the native plants. You see, we have wonderful photographs like that. There's the person, and throughout the book you have these photographs of the people and their personal story. Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. And so that has just been published, and the photography, I think, is absolutely superb. So there's many thanks to John Maillard for that photography.
And is that available anywhere else other than the University Bookshop?
It's well, as they say, it's being sold at all good bookshops.
That's what we like to hear. Yeah. And it is. I mean, it is really interesting that experience you had when you came home. I was lucky enough to go to Ireland a few years ago, and I think, I saw our native broadleaves being used in hedges,
yes,
and cork, and every second house had a cabbage tree. I think there's more cabbage trees in England. Every night on TV you see cabbage trees in English TV programs.
Very, very noticeable.
And they seem to be more loved over there than what they are here.
Isn't
really
it?
Sad.
Well, that's certainly what I found. And indeed, in here there is one narrative from the Isle of Wight and the south of the United Kingdom. But what you say, I think, is true, that you go overseas and you'll find many countries using New Zealand native plants. Why? Because they're colourful, and the drought. Some of them are drought tolerant, and indeed, not forgetting that we have a remarkable flora, really remarkable. We have lovely orchids. I mean, how many people know that New Zealand has lovely native orchids? It's just quite remarkable, isn't it?
It is, and sort of earlier today, one of the people we were interviewing was sitting at this bench waiting for their interview, and quite sadly people were asking him, what's this tree? I mean, this is New Zealand's national flower, for heaven's sake. And because it hasn't got its glorious yellow flowers on it, they didn't recognise this as our kowhai.
Kowhai, yes, and that dripping yellow orange blossom in the springtime. But talking about icons or New Zealand national flowers, of course we have the silver fern. But also, as in addition to having these books published, what I launched a few years ago was New Zealand's vote for its favourite native plant.
All right, you were.
I was behind that, and it's carried out every year. And so far, the silver fern hasn't appeared anywhere. And in the first year, the winner was Pahutakawa, not surprising. Yeah. And kowhai was up there as well. But that raises all sorts of questions, though, about, what should New Zealand's icon plants should be? Should we continue with the silver fern? Maybe we should suggest something else, but maybe that doesn't fit with the sports image.
That's a very good question, though, isn't it? Yeah. And it's not until you go out and ask people these questions that we really know.
It's proved very, very popular, and a lot of school teachers have come back to me and said it makes a marvellous educational resource, because, as I was saying before, that when I first started visiting schools and talking about native plants and going around schools in the late 1990s, there were some children who really believed that macrocarpa or lupins were New Zealand natives, you see. But now providing this annual vote for New Zealand's most favourite native plant, that is used as an educational resource. So you ask the children, what would you vote for, or bring it in, and they'll bring in exotics and natives, and then you can kindly explain which are New Zealand natives and so on. So great educational resource.
And you said there's going to be a trilogy. We've only got 2 here.
Well, everyone writes trilogies, don't they? Or quadrilogies, if it's going to be 4. There's another one. It's being planned right now. Well, in fact, again, it's Canterbury University Press, and it's called Design with Natives. Here we are sitting at Ellerslie Flower Show, Design with Natives, and this is going to be a showcasing designers, landscape designers. A number of people throughout New Zealand showing their art, and again there'll be that kind of personal touch. So we've now identified a number of landscape architects, garden designers who are going to contribute to this third one, because we felt, well indeed, having had this one published some years ago now, but and in giving talks about this one, a lot of people said, well, I love the design aspect, but so where do I go to find books that use predominantly, not entirely, but use predominantly natives in their gardens or around the schools or on the marae? So we thought, well, good idea. Let's go and ask some designers to help, and that's what we're doing now. So myself, it's the same group of people. Myself, Michelle Frey, and John Maylard. Onto the third book, as I say, with Canterbury University Press. And
it'll be a similar format to this one, people's stories?
Probably a similar format. I mean, that sort of lends itself to sort of that. I mean, to allow that photography, that kind of photography. So imagine some landscape designs spread across 2 pages, rather like that. So it could well be something like that. Could I just say something about the royalties? You haven't asked me about where does the money go. I mean these books make money.
That's probably
let me tell you.
Thing that most people actually think about when they write a book about getting some money. How dedicated you are.
Don't you believe it? I've written many books or edited many books, and there is no money in it. Well, there is. There are things called royalties, but in both cases, in this case and in the third book, myself and the co-editor and the photographer have foregone the royalties. Right. So any profit that comes out of these books goes to New Zealand plant conservation projects, and that's in the contract. So, and only recently did I hear from Canterbury University Press the royalties have come in for this book. And I'm delighted to say that money is now going. In fact, I really like to say this. It's going to the New Zealand Plant Conservation Network, which in turn will put that into what we call the David Given Fund for research on New Zealand rare native plants. And of course, as I said before, I've remembered my dear old friend David Given. So the New Zealand Plant Conservation Network has established this fund. And I was pleased to say that Michelle and I agreed that any profits from this book should go into that fund for further research into New Zealand native plants. So I'm delighted to say that.
That's good. And just, I mean, we're really here to plug this excellent book and beautiful book too. There's some beautiful photography.
Isn't it? Lovely. Yeah. Yes. Buy it, people. Buy it.
I'm also aware that you've got some views on how native plants could be restored across the Canterbury Plains.
Well,
heard some ideas of yours on that before?
Yes, I mean, yes. Well, you are prompting me. I mean, dare I say this? Well, look, listen. In the Canterbury Lowlands, something like over 99% of New Zealand native plant cover has gone.
It's gone.
It's gone. So less than 1% of New Zealand native plant cover on the Canterbury lowlands. Now, I mean, not forgetting there is a wonderful conservation estate, and I think New Zealand has one of the largest, in terms of the proportion of land area, has one of the largest conservation estates in the world for any particular country. But here in Canterbury, go and look for New Zealand natives. They're very hard to find. And I think personally, because we've damaged New Zealand native plants and the native plant community so much, I think we owe nature an apology. And I think we should be setting about trying to restore that. And I would suggest, and not popular, but I would suggest on all public land, there should be a policy for using New Zealand native plants. And perhaps from here on, unless there's another good reason. I mean, it might be a memorial oak tree or something like that. But I think what do they call it? Default position should be New Zealand native plants to be using on public land, and that's something I would try and push with Christchurch City Council, our beautiful garden city. And with Environment Canterbury and Selwyn District Council. But noticeably, over the last few years, more and more native plants are being used along the roads, along the waterways. It's wonderful, beautiful colours and textures along the waterways in particular.
And of course our braided rivers would have had these in them originally rather than gorse and broom.
Of course, and all of the native wildlife that goes with those native plant communities. So what we're left with are isolated trees, and they don't have the grasses to go with them, or the other associated plants to go with them. It's just solitary trees, and that's all what's left. But having mentioned that, something else that I've been involved in is that I'm thinking of the lowlands of Canterbury, and think of that area of land between the two mighty rivers, between the Waimakariri and the Rikaya, and that strip of land. So from Te Waiora, Banks Peninsula, and back up to the mountains, that strip of land, we've set up a trust. Myself and a few like-minded people have set up a trust called the Te Ara Kakariki Greenway Canterbury Trust. We did that just a few years ago, and it's all about promoting the use of New Zealand native plants for all reasons, not just restoration, but they could be crop plants or shelter plants, but all sorts of reasons for using New Zealand native plants. So I'm unashamedly promoting the use of New Zealand native plants across Canterbury and throughout New Zealand for that matter.
Certainly one of the things that's always surprised me, I mean, I've worked in the farming community for some time now, and you see all these poplar shelter belts around, and yet, a ribbonwood, and you say, why do you use poplar? And well, it grows fast
growing.
Its leaves, and
yet
our native ribbonwoods grow to a height they don't need to trim them like they do with poplars, and they lose their leaves in the winter, and they support that native wildlife.
They do indeed.
And it is encouraging to see a few more farmers starting to use that. And the Lincoln University farm, I noticed a shelter about
they do, because I happen to be talking to some people at Lincoln University. But that's a showcase. That is a showcase. But it's an extraordinary story, isn't it? I mean, 100 years ago, it was the thing to do. So you clear all that native vegetation, and then you have all these high winds, and the nor'westers and the cold sou'westers and so on. So where do you get the windbreaks from? Well, we need something fast growing. So poplars or eucalypts or macrocarpus. But it's true what you say. There are a number of native plants which do grow very quickly. They're drought tolerant, and if you use combinations of them, they make wonderful windbreaks. And indeed, the Isaac Centre for Nature Conservation I was talking about before, together with Environment Canterbury, have published a leaflet about the use of New Zealand native plants as windbreaks or shelter belts, and gives quite a lot of advice about what species and aftercare management. So there's a lot of advice in that leaflet. But it's certainly true that I would say that a combination of New Zealand native species, not only the tall growing trees, but also the shrubs and the grasses do make a wonderful native shelter belt, just as effective as the old poplars and the eucalypts. And indeed, some people these days use something like eucalypts as a nursery crop, and then plant amongst them some natives. So when the natives are coming up through and are well established, then they take the eucalypts out as fuel or firewood. So that works very well indeed. So we're seeing more and more of that.
Yes, I think we are too. And it always intrigues me that, with that argument, they're slow going and that, but they put their poplars in or their eucalypts and they put in irrigation for them and they put some fertiliser in. You think, well, if you did that with the natives, get the same or better result anyway?
You probably would. You probably would. Yes. So there are fast-growing natives, very colourful ones in terms of flowers, and beautiful in terms of texture, and the scent. The scent of some of our native plants. I mean, just think of the cabbage trees flowering around September. Isn't it heavenly? That wonderful, beautiful scent of cabbage tree flowers. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you could bottle that somehow and sell that as a New Zealand icon, what couldn't you?
Why not? The French do that with their perfume industry.
Couldn't they? Yes.
And the other thing too is it really gives us a sense of place, doesn't it? I mean, if we're surrounded by pine trees and stuff, maybe we may as well be in Europe. I do agree with you. I mean, we have an interesting past over the last few hundred years or more, and what was happening then was the thing to do. And many people would argue that is our heritage. So what is out there, the geometry of the Canterbury Plains, with no native plants, that is our heritage. So we must accept that. But I think views change, values change, times change, and I think there's a growing. Well, indeed, I'm in no doubt, absolutely, evidence right there.
Because the rate at which these books are being sold and being bought, I think is clear evidence that there's a growing interest in New Zealand native plants. And I really do think that we owe nature an apology. We have to try and change that landscape with more and more natives. And of course, these days we have some wonderful New Zealand native plant nurseries. And here, of course, around Christchurch or throughout Canterbury, we have several. I shouldn't name many because I might be, but we do, don't we? We have several.
But you did
several.
Right. And as you say, you go back 20 or 30 years, you really struggled to find somewhere to buy a native plant.
Go to a garden centre.
Pick a few out of the bush if you wanted them.
I don't think it's very wise.
There's some excellent nurseries.
There's some excellent nurseries, easily obtainable. Indeed, we did a survey of the nurseries who grow predominantly the native plants a year ago, and they tell us they cannot keep up with demand.
Is that right?
They cannot keep up with demand. So they are planting natives by the thousand for large-scale projects and throughout the usual retail outlets, but they just cannot keep up with demand. So I think, again, that's evidence that there is this desire to use native plants in new gardens or in restoration or for education or for landscape design and so on. So we're seeing lots and lots of examples of that, which is wonderful.
And I think we're seeing, our local authorities using them more too. I mean, for example, the Styx Bridge, Marshall Road.
Isn't that wonderful?
Isn't
that wonderful?
Absolutely spectacular. A main entrance into the city. And you've got something
exactly, and I think they could do the same around Christchurch International Airport. And I know a number of people who have suggested that as you come out of the airport and go towards that roundabout, I mean, surely there should be wonderful displays of New Zealand natives, and perhaps even going down Memorial Avenue. But that might lead to some controversy, mightn't it? But no, I think you're right. As you come into New Zealand, why aren't we promoting this wonderful array of unique plants, colourful, aromatic, easy to grow? This is our heritage, and it supports all our native wildlife, our birds and skinks and so on. So why aren't we promoting that? So as you land, you're coming in from Europe or wherever, and as you're coming into land, they show these introductions to New Zealand, and you have fleeting glances of a native plant, but also mixed up with exotic plants as well. So why not more about the New Zealand native plants on those? But it's hard to sell plants in the first place, and it's in some ways it's very hard to sell native plants. And we have this mad idea that somewhere here on the Canterbury Plains, why do we have a plant centre, a national plant centre, predominantly native plants, which we could promote the educational side, the pharmaceutical side, have artists there, almost a kind of a village, or indeed something like this. But as a permanent feature for educational and the photography, painting, growing native plants, but as a major attraction.
There's another project.
Have you heard of the Eden project in the southwest of England?
Is that the one in the dome?
That's the one on the dome. Yes. That was I believe was a Millennium project, and of course they had huge amount of money from the EU, but established this as a major plant centre. It is difficult to get people excited about plants.
Yes, it is.
And they have been more than successful. And so it just occurs to me that if we had a few entrepreneurs, I mean, where else would you go? Apart from, we have some wonderful botanic gardens, true, but we could extend that concept into having artists and photographers and working with native plants and so on, growing them from seed and so on. But a major centre, so take the family for the weekend as a major tourist attraction to go to this place somewhere on the Canterbury Plains. So if you happen to know with someone with a few million dollars who want to invest in what I think would be a major.
Dairying's income's reducing, so that might be the new.
Well, maybe in addition to that, but a major feature, yes, where you could have the educational and the ultimate plant experience, mainly with native plants, but also people doing things. You could, yes, imagine a chemist shop there, or a bakery, but using the taste of New Zealand native plants, or perfumes. There are lots of people, indeed design clothing with New Zealand native plants. So there's plenty of people around doing it at the moment, aren't there? There are clothing designers. People using essences from New Zealand native plants for scents.
Even in cookery now, they're starting to use some of our native plants as herbs. And,
yes,
that would have been unheard of even 10 years ago.
Even 10 years ago. So just imagine bringing all of that together. I mean, this is going a long way from this from talking about books, isn't it? But just imagine.
It's all tied together, really.
Well, in a way.
Those seeds,
quite rightly. But having a major tourist attraction, we could really promote plants. And after all, we depend on plants for the quality of the air we're breathing, the quality of the water that we're drinking, and the quality of the soil. I mean, all of that depends on plants. And if by magic we could make all the plants disappear, all the green plants, that is, all the green plants disappear, we'd all be dead in a few hours.
That's right.
Because where would the oxygen come from? So we depend on plants.
And like many things we depend on, we just take that for granted, don't we?
Well, exactly. I mean, we're sitting on plant material. This is made of plant material. And what did you have for breakfast this morning? Did you have cereals? Plant material. Didn't you? Reading the newspaper? Plant material. Writing with a pencil? Plant material, isn't it? Now, the air we're breathing and the quality of water, all of that depends on plants.
Even if we had a hamburger for lunch, ultimately it's grass, isn't it?
It goes back to plants again, doesn't it? So I think there is a way of selling plants, but in particular, I mean, it could be an international centre for plants, all of those things we're talking about, and rather like we're doing here, but focusing on New Zealand's natural heritage,
yes,
which I think wouldn't be before time, and thinking back to those Millennium celebrations, when countries around the world were building huge towers and steel architecture and so on, I thought there was an opportunity there for New Zealand to do something in terms of its native plants and its native flora, but it didn't happen. And I remember being on some of those Millennium committees, and there was a discussion for a while about plantings along the main south road.
Well,
Did you hear about that?
Well, yes, and then I saw the results of that with some exotic imported trees planted along there.
Yes, well, at one stage, myself and some others did make the suggestion that along the main south road, why shouldn't we, for a Millennium Project to celebrate New Zealand, that we have all New Zealand native plants, and at that time, some certain people from certain districts throughout Canterbury almost fell off their chair and said, no, I mean, they won't grow. It's the same thing that we talked about before.
In fact, they've been here for millions of years, but they won't grow.
They won't tolerate the dry conditions, and they're not colourful, and they're hard to keep, and they lose their leaves, and they're a nuisance, and so on. But that's not true. We know that's not true. So I think that there was an opportunity missed. That Millennium celebrations, we could have had a lot of native plant celebrations, but thankfully there are people throughout Canterbury who, under their own initiative, are using native plants for all sorts of reasons, and not just for restoration, but also, as we mentioned before, as shelter plants and crop plants. And for education and so on. And the example you mentioned with Lincoln University Dairy Farm, where they've put in, I don't know the exact number, but it must go into the thousands of plants. Those are all native. So that dairy farm will become a showcase of showing how you can use New Zealand native plants. So absolutely delighted that that's happening.
Yes, no, it's a credit. Well, Ian, it's been great to have you, and I think you've probably excited quite a lot of us with your vision of a big plant conservation area where that's alive, if you like, with people interacting and living and working in it, and it's certainly a lovely vision to put out in front of the public.
Well, it's a possibility, and I think if there were some entrepreneurs out there with vision, I think they wouldn't lose out. To sell that as a New Zealand national centre for plants and to equal the Eden Project or something bigger than that. Come to New Zealand. Come to Canterbury. Come to Canterbury. Come via Christchurch International Airport. Come through the wonderful city we have here, and then go out and see this wonderful plant centre. Innovative, educational, people doing paintings and photographs and drawing and sketching and planting and all of that. But someone out there must have the land, and someone there must have a lot of money they could put into this. And draw up a business plan.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.